Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Is it second canto or first canto? Second canto, chapter 9. Chapter 1. Chapter 9, verse number 1. Shri Sukuvacha Atman Mayamrite Rajan Parasya Nubhavat Manaha Nagate Tartha Sambandha Swapna Drashtur Ivanjasa. Translation. Sri Sukha Goswami said, O King, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj Parikshit's question as to how a living entity began his material life, although he is apart from the material body and mind, is perfectly answered. The spirit soul is distinct from the material conception of his life, but he is absorbed in such a material conception because of being influenced by the external energy of the Lord called Atma Maya. This has already been explained in the first canto in connection with Vyasadev's realization of the Supreme Lord and his external energy. The external energy is controlled by the Lord, and the living entities are controlled by the external energy, by the will of the Lord. Therefore, although the living entity is purely conscious in his pure state, he is subordinate to the will of the Lord in being influenced by the external energy of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita 15.15, also the same thing is confirmed. The Lord is present within the heart of every living entity, and all the living entities' consciousness and forgetfulness are influenced by the Lord. Now the next question automatically made will be why the Lord influences a living entity to such consciousness and forgetfulness. The answer is that the Lord clearly wishes that every living entity be in his pure consciousness as part and parcel of the Lord, and thus be engaged in the loving service of the Lord, as he is constitutionally made. But because the living entity is partially independent also, he may not be willing to serve the Lord, but may try to become independent as the Lord is. All the non-devotee living entities are desirous of becoming equally as powerful as the Lord, although they are not fit to become so. The living entities are illusioned by the will of the Lord because they want to become like him, like a person who thinks of becoming a king without possessing the necessary qualification. When the living entity desires to become the Lord himself, he is put in a condition of dreaming that he is the king. Therefore, the first sinful will of the living entity is to become the Lord, and the consequent will of the Lord is that the living entity forget his factual life, and thus dream of the land of utopia, where he may become one with the Lord. The child cries to have the moon from the mother, and the mother gives the child a mirror to satisfy the crying and disturbing child with a reflection of the moon. Similarly, the crying of the Lord is given over to the reflection, the material world, to lord it over as karmi, and to give this up in frustration to become one with the Lord. Both these stages are dreaming illusions only. There is no necessity of tracing out the history of when the living entity desired this. But the fact is that as soon as he desired, he was put under the control of Atma Maya by the direction of the Lord. Therefore, the living entity in this material condition is dreaming falsely that this is open quote, mind, close quote. And this is, open quote, I, close quote. The dream is that the conditioned soul thinks of his material body as, open quote, I, close quote, or falsely thinks that he is the Lord, and that everything is in connection with that material body. And everything is in connection with that material body is, open quote, mine, close quote. Thus, only in a dream does the misconception of, open quote, I, close quote, and open quote, mine, close quote, persist life after life. This continues life after life, as long as the living entity is not purely conscious of his identity as the subordinate part and parcel of the Lord. In his pure consciousness, however, there is no such misconceived dream. In that pure conscious state, the living entity does not forget that he is never the Lord, but that he is eternally the servitor of the Lord in transcendental love. The verse again by Srila Prabhupada. Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, O King, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. So Prabhupada is talking about the difference between the sense of I being the material body and the material body being a group of material elements that have nothing to do with the real self. This purport indicates that we do always possess some free will, but our free will is limited. We have the will to turn away from the Supreme Lord at any time, and we have the free will to become His servant. It is the nature of all of us to want to become the Lord or become the master of all we survey. But this is not possible. This tendency is actually given to us by the Supreme Lord. Even those who are very atheistic and very forgetful of the Lord are given that ability to forget by the mercy of the Lord. It is said in the Chaitanya Chaitamrita, Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sajja Kabunai Shravanadi Chitte Kariye Udai, meaning that we are all part and parcel of Krishna, and we are all in remembrance of Krishna, but temporarily we are forgetful. So when a person goes out to canvas, or to distribute books, for example, and gets 100 or 200 I'm not interested no's from people, even if there's one person who is interested or satisfied, it becomes very relishable for a devotee, even though it's only maybe 0.5% of all the attempts. The one attempt that there is a devotee makes life worth living, makes things successful. So it's imperative that everybody who's a devotee tries to awaken the natural tendency to be Krishna conscious, and sees that everyone who is not Krishna conscious is in a sleeping condition. That sleeping condition has to be revived, and a person who is sleeping needs to be awakened. There are many attempts that Prabhupada has made to awaken the living entities, including pictures in his books. He was very concerned that the books not be printed until pictures were able to be included in there. And it was the pictures, in a way, that sold most of the books, because people were enamored by the photographs. Prabhupada has recently built a big temple called the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium in order to advise people that there's another dimension to life. We think that we learn in astronomical classes that the planets circle the sun, or there is a heliocentric universe. But there is another dimension that the world is the center of the universe and that all planets circulate around the world. That has been illustrated by the likes of Sariputta in some of his illustrations. By understanding the workings of higher mathematics, he was able to understand that something can be, like the Earth, can be round and flat at the same time. Very difficult for people to understand. So the people who are very involved in the Vedic Planetarium, Prabhupada gave it the name, Vedic Planetarium. It's a planetarium that's actually a temple at the same time. It's kind of a planetarium that sings. It's not an ordinary planetarium. It's a planetarium and a temple at the same time. The person who did the building of it, Sadhubhuja, who has a house here, is very expert at promoting this thing. His background is an electrician or electrical engineer, but he was asked to design this very magnificent structure, which is, the outside of it is almost complete, but to complete the whole thing is going to take a very, very long time. And it's in a way, it's Prabhupada's challenge to the scientific community, or the astrological community, or astronomical community. The central feature is a chandelier that is so large it doesn't even fit through any of the doors to the building. It has to be taken apart and put in modular fashion and reassembled and taken in piece by piece and reassembled in the temple and then hung from the center of the dome. So Prabhupada was always challenging science. He wanted, in 1976 and 1977, a number of astrologers and astronomers to present their concept to him, to present a map of the structure of the universe. None were to his satisfaction. And he knew, for example, because he sometimes utilized airplanes, he knew that by flying, say, for example, in the western direction from Los Angeles, eventually you would reach Calcutta or New Delhi. But according to Vedic astrology, or astronomy, that's not exactly true. You can go the other way, and you can do all sorts of things. And the Earth is not necessarily a sphere, but it's also a mandala plane. So there were many things that Prabhupada said that were challenging to science. And one was that in 1973, he was lecturing on nectar devotion in Bombay. This is an actual occurrence. And he said that we think that there is evaporation of the ocean at all times. The sun is beaming down and causing the water to evaporate. But because over a lot of the ocean, there is no evidence of any cloud. The water is being evaporated constantly, but there is no evidence of this. This is a challenge to the people who study weather patterns, or meteorologists. Where is the water actually going? And Prabhupada said that the sun is actually stealing the water. It's keeping it out of sight and out of mind. This is a challenge. And he asked if there were any scientists in the audience who would disagree, and would they challenge him? And not one person spoke up. And he went on to say that when there are sometimes clouds in the sky, it's because the sun decides to release the water, and then it comes down sometimes as rainfall. But because there is a vast area of the surface of the Earth, the ocean area, without clouds, it appears that there is no water, but there is water. But the sun is according to Prabhupada, is taken away by the sun. So this is kind of magical and hard for us to understand, but Prabhupada said this in a lecture and asked scientists who were listening, and this is in Bombay, in the audience, if there was any objection to what he said, and no one objected. So he was always challenging what we think. And from the very beginning, Nectar Devotion was written while he was in the West, and Chaitanya Charitamrita was also written while he was in the West in the United States. Sometimes he would say in these books, that our way of life, because we think that because of great advances in things like medicine and travel and communication, that things are actually getting better, and we should embrace technology and all the advances that are, and there's many magazines and television shows and radio programs that support this, that it's all very good. But Prabhupada even went on to say that it's not so good, that it's actually mysteriously incorrect, even though most people do think it's correct. And some time ago, Sariputta wrote a book called Alien Identities. It was all about unidentified flying objects that were supposedly violating the material methods of propulsion and scientific methods of radiography and radar and propulsion and that sort of thing. It's a very interesting presentation. It's a little difficult to understand if you don't have a mathematical background. His doctorate was in mathematics from Cornell, but it's very difficult. So it was always a great challenge. And sometimes we are embracing things that are not particularly part of the material world, but are interesting. There was a time when I was very much enamored with Balinese music. I had a friend who was studying, I think he was a PhD candidate at Columbia University, something called ethnomusicology. And he gave me some tapes of Balinese music, and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. It's not just that I liked it, it was kind of a love affair. I really liked it. And I had tapes of Balinese music being played for 4 or 5 hours constantly where I was living. And it was one of the great thrills of my life, because they only used about 5 notes, and they made some very beautiful music out of it. So one day I decided to actually go to Bali and see what it was like, because they were playing these things called gamelons. You know what a gamelan band is, those of you who've been to Bali. They're sort of like marimbas. I don't know what they're made out of, but they play them with mallets. And so I thought, all right, I'll just check out this place. And when I went there, I had a couple of free passes to the Sheraton Hotel in Denpasar. It's the capital of Bali, or one of the biggest cities, or the biggest city. And then I learned that there was a concert, a gamelan concert one evening. So I thought, well, I'll just go along and see what they're doing. So instead of just 2 or 3 people playing the gamelan, there was a whole orchestra of about 26 men dressed in finest silk clothing, different shades of brown, wearing typical black Balinese hats. And at the same time, there were 3 ladies in white silk clothing dancing in perfect unison with long 30-centimeter crowns on their heads, golden, pointing skyward. And it was a very interesting performance. And it was an outdoors sort of pavilion, and full of tables, maybe about 20 tables with white tablecloths. And I was escorted to a front row sort of table right near the stage. It was an affair of about 20 centimeters tall. And they brought something for me to drink. And I don't know if it was laced with Johnny Walker or whatever. It was a margarita or a Orange Julius or whatever. I didn't touch it anyway. I just started to watch the performance. And lo and behold, although I was very enamored with this style of performance and music, I thought the whole thing was kind of dull and uninteresting. And so I waited till it was over, and many were taking photographs. They would have their spouses or their sons or daughters stand or sit with the orchestra or the ladies that were dancing and take photographs of them. So anyway, I left thinking it was kind of a non-event. It was kind of interesting because Balinese music was a great thrill in my life, but it wasn't at all thrilling to see the whole orchestra perform and the dancers perform. Even though it was probably as exotic and interesting as it gets, it wasn't at all interesting to me. It was just kind of dull, and I realized that my former infatuation was no longer existing, because I had developed at least a glimpse of love of Krishna, which was far more interesting and happy than my seeing the up close, the Balinese performance. So that happened. And Prabhupada is saying that we are very much enamored with the material world, and that we're given this feeling of being part of it by, as he mentions in the Bhagavad Gita 15:15, which is the verse that all remembrance and forgetfulness comes from me, that one becomes enamored with the material world because the material world is uninteresting, but Krishna gives us this intelligence. So even the atheist is given some intelligence. He's given the intelligence to understand that it's not real. But he thinks it's real. And Prabhupada gives the example here as of slapna, which means the dream state. Some psychologists say the dreams take place in a matter of just a fraction of a second, but they seem like they're hours long. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they say, some psychologists. Anyway, the point is that the material world is like a dream state, just like the dream that we sometimes have at night. There's a daydream and a night dream. And even though it seems very real and very powerful and part of our pains and pleasures, it's actually a dream state. It's not real. It's just a dream. One of the things that Prabhupada used to rail against were the people who thought that this dream was a reality. And then he also railed against people who thought that this dream was false, that the material world was false. It's kind of like the Buddhist or impersonal concept of God, that there's nothing real. It's sunyavadi. It's all imagination. And the verse that he often quotes is Aruha Krichchena Padam Padam Padam. It's part of the 10th canto, is that there are many instances of people who have become perfect in this form of realization, and somehow or other migrate to the Brahma Jyoti or merge with the Supreme Lord and then come back to the material world to engage in welfare work. It's a very common theme in Prabhupada's lectures, that the people who are very advanced in the material world come back to the material world, and the reason that they come back is that they find there's no variety in the material world, in the spiritual world, in that part of the spiritual world anyway. There's no variety in the Brahma Jyoti. And his gross example of how this is true is sometimes given as flying in an airplane, where we can fly above the clouds and everything is very shiny and blue and beautiful, but there's no variety. And as soon as there is some land sighted, it's sort of like being on the ocean in an ocean liner. For miles and miles, all you can see is water. But as soon as there's land, then one becomes somewhat enlivened. And Prabhupada had this experience himself when he was sailing to the United States or coming to the United States in a steamship. But there is no variety on the ocean, and there's no variety in the air. But as soon as there is some variety, and he quoted many times the aphorism that variety is the mother of enjoyment, or variety is the spice of life, someone said, then people can become able to enjoy things. And that's why people come down from the sort of Brahma Jyoti to the material world, because at least there's variety. It may not be correct variety, but at least it's variety. And that's the reason that people sometimes return to the material world, which they had been, initially described as being false, as being not real. But its reality was very clear to them when they came back to take part in whatever they took part in, social work or whatever. So the idea of devotee is to awaken one's natural forgetfulness, or to awaken one from this dream state that we're in, this feeling that everything is a dream, that it's not real, and to awaken us to Krishna consciousness. That's the purpose of devotees, to bring about the awakened state of life, to bring Krishna consciousness to the masses. And Srila Prabhupada went to much extreme. His only complaint, of course, as we know, was that people didn't read his books, and he worked very hard to make these books a reality, sometimes getting up at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning and writing or translating books. And he often said that, not often, but at least once on one occasion, he said that my only complaint is that people don't read my books. He was making great sacrifices to produce these books, and he was very happy to find that there was a way to produce many books by modern technology in Los Angeles. He was very happy to see this happen. And even when he was recording the first recording, he kind of was aware that this was a way to distribute the holy name wide and far. to do it through a recording. And the story is that he even kissed the floor of the recording studio because he was so enamored with the fact that he could use this technology in a way that was suitable for Krishna. This is a symptom that the devotees are aware of, that we can use everything for Krishna. It's part of Nasakasya Vishayam Yatarham Upayunjita. Nirbandha Krishna Sambandhe Yukta Vairagya Uchite, the famous quote by Rupa Goswami that things can be used for Krishna. Prabhupada said that it was a common mudra for many of these impersonalists to hold their hand up as if to say, don't give it to me, I reject it. But he said, my mudra is like this. Whether it's money, technology, or whatever, it could be used in the service of Krishna. Everything except envy could be used in the service of Krishna. So I will read the verse again. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayam Rite Rajan Paras Gyanu Bhavatmanaha Tagate Karta Sambandyaha Swapna Drashtur Ivan Dusa. Shri Sukha Goswami said, O King, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. So any comments or questions? Okay, let's stop there. Hare Krishna.